In this video, I'm going to be sharing my sexual assault story. And I'm not gonna lie, it feels a little bit scary to be posting this. I've been going back and forth. I've started and stopped recording this so many times. And you might be wondering, what are you talking about, Ashley? Don't you do this for a living? Don't you travel and tell your story? And you're absolutely correct. However, recording this video just feels a little extra vulnerable and a little bit different too, and I'll explain why in a moment. But real quick, if this is your first time here on my channel, I'm Ashley Bendixson. I am a survivor turned national speaker. My experience with abuse in my adolescence totally changed my life in ways I never could have imagined, and one of those was influencing my career. Today, this is my subject matter expertise, and my full-time work is traveling the country and speaking. I talk to everyone from students and teachers to law enforcement, workplaces, the military, you name it. So yes, I do tell my story full-time, and I've been telling my story at the time of this video for over 17 years, which is crazy. But I feel like recording this video feels just slightly different because when I speak on stages, it is a fleeting moment of connection with the audiences. I have a short amount of time. I tell my story very briefly and concisely and use it to teach. But I've never actually put this out there to live on the internet where anybody can just watch it and comment. And also, I've never really told my full story. I've never told with all the details. Like I said, on stage, I have to kind of just be concise and use my story to teach. And this, I think, is the first time that I'm kind of just putting my story out there in full, in detail, totally raw, vulnerable, unscripted, unpracticed, unrehearsed. But I think it's really important for me to share my story for two reasons. One, I know through my work that it is our stories that create change. It creates solidarity, and these are issues that most of us keep silent, and by telling our stories, we can make a difference. And two, for anybody who's found me on the internet, who follows my channel or might want to follow my channel, I think it's important for you to have some background on me and kind of understand where all this work comes from and why I'm so passionate about what I do. So let's just take a collective deep breath together because I'm about to tell you probably the most intimate story of my life. And it feels inherently, yes, scary, but if there's anything I've learned, it is to not be ashamed. So let's dive right in. I experienced abuse as a teenager. But before I get into the details, real quick, let me tell you who I was before the abuse, before the assaults, and before my life took a horrible, damaging turn. So I grew up on the southeastern coast of Massachusetts, small coastal town, and I was a really outgoing and ambitious kid. From a very young age, I was always outgoing and ambitious. I was in dancing school. I loved school. I was quirky. I had a funny sense of humor. I was confident. I was, outgoing. I was just kind of a normal, silly kid. And also, for a little background context, I was born in the 80s, which means that I was a child of the 90s. And with that comes Disney princess movies and boy bands and all the pop culture and the rom-coms. So as a young girl and as a teenager, one of the things that I was overexposed to was this idea of love and relationships and romance. And for as long as I can remember, I was all about it. I was love crazy. I remember my first crush in preschool. I remember all the crushes I had in middle school. I mean, I constantly had a crush on someone. But, one of the things that, wasn't anything horrible, but something that bothered me as a preteen and a tween was the fact that nobody ever seemed to have a crush on me. So, you always kind of hope for that moment, or at least I did. I saw this in the movies. I heard the love song lyrics, and, romance and partnership was aspirational, and it's something I wanted, right? How magical this feeling would be if someone reciprocated it. And when I went to high school, finally that happened. So I had a crush on a boy who also had a crush on me. And I remember just being so giddy about him. He was the first boy to ask for my number. He was the first boy that I ever dated or was in a relationship with. And it started off very, very innocent. Now, I was 14. I was a freshman. My parents were not allowing me to date. But from their perspective, it was totally innocent and cool. And my parents allowed me to talk to this boy on the phone. He would call the house. I'd take the cordless phone into my room. And every day at school, I would see him at school and I'd get those butterflies. And I was just so giddy and excited. And after we did this for a little while, this is when everything changed. And this is really when the start of my abuse story begins. We were only dating for a little while when one day on the phone, he said to me, "Ashley, I really wish I could spend time with you. Why can't you just lie to your parents and pretend you're hanging out with a friend and you and I can hang out?" Now, right there, that ask was uncomfortable. I really liked this boy. I mean, it felt like my world revolved around this boy, right? 14-year-old girl. This is life when you're a teenager. And I didn't want him to maybe break up with me. I was just concerned that he was asking me this and that he was expressing disappointment. And so I didn't really know what to say because I was a really good kid. I had never lied to my parents. I was super well behaved. I was, raised to be a good girl. And so the idea of lying and sneaking out was definitely not something that I wanted to do. However, he just kept bringing it up and bringing it up. And finally, after enough nagging and constantly asking and kind of pressuring me into just lying, "It's no big deal, your parents are being lame," all these words and thoughts being put into my head, I finally agreed to go on a secret date. So we made these plans and basically we picked a day. And as you can imagine, I was super nervous to get caught. I thought my parents would just look at me that day and know I was lying or hiding something, but they didn't seem to notice anything. And I spent, that morning before school getting all dressed up, trying to look a little extra cute. And by the time the last bell rang, I was so excited because I was going on my first real life date. As much as I hated the lying and the sneaking around, this was my first date ever. I would get to spend alone time with this boy. And of course, all week I had been imagining what might happen on the date. Is he going to hold my hand? Will he try to kiss me, right? Why wouldn't he? It's a date. Isn't that what happens? And so, all week I'd been studying what I saw on TV, practicing on my hand, trying to get ready. I had no idea what I was doing. And, I look back at my story up until that moment, and it's just really beautiful and blissful that I was just so innocent about it all. And I was just a girl. So we were on the date, and some of the things I thought might happen were happening. He held my hand during the movie. And of course, my hand is just sweaty and clammy. My heart's racing. I'm hardly paying attention to the movie because I'm just thinking about him being next to me. And finally, at one point, he starts to lean in. And it was at this point that I thought that he was going to try and kiss me. So I kind of my heart picked up, a few extra beats. I was getting nervous. I was getting excited. I wanted to kiss him. And instead, he reached his hand over to my pants. And I just kind of froze up a little bit and I got a little bit nervous and I didn't really know what he was trying to do. So I kind of just smiled and squirmed and pushed his hand away and then that was kind of it. And he kept leaning in and he whispered a few things to me to try to calm me down. Things like, "Just relax, it's okay." And he continued to try to unbutton my pants. Now, I did not know what was happening. I mean, I kind of understood where he was going, but these were not concepts or intimate acts that I had thought about, and they certainly were not things that I had mentally prepared myself for on this first date, I was just thinking about a kiss, right? Don't kisses come first? So he just kind of kept trying and trying to put his hand down my pants, and I kept doing the same thing. I was just kind of giggling and pushing his hand away and trying to politely decline. But he kept again saying things like, just relax, it's no big deal. Why are you acting like that? And so I then got into my head and just kind of started to question if I was doing something wrong, if I was being weird or being a lame girlfriend. I just didn't know what to make of it. And I want to just make a quick PSA about things like first dates and miscommunication. I am not labeling what happened on that first date as an assault, at least in my experience. Technically, it would be an assault. I did not clearly consent to it, but I think this is something that is so common on first dates, early in relationships, and this is why it's so important to communicate your expectations, to ask someone if they're comfortable with what you're doing, to say, is this okay? Can I kiss you? Can I touch you here? Unfortunately, though, when you're young, you just don't think to do these things. So if you are young watching this, have these conversations. It might feel awkward, but it's much better than making your partner feel uncomfortable. And if you have young people in your life, again, this might be an awkward conversation to have with them, but it's so important that we teach young people in their relationships to communicate and help them to understand what consent is. So what happened to me on that first date happens to a lot of people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that abuse ever comes. They could have a totally healthy relationship from there on out. But unfortunately for me, what I experienced on that first date was really just a first red flag. It was the earliest indication that this partner was going to become abusive. And it was just a matter of time before soon he asked me again, why don't we go out on another date? Just lie to your parents, say you're doing this, say you're doing that. And I yet again said yes. And it was on these secret dates that he had all of these expectations. He had expectations around intimacy, around things he felt that we should be doing. And it was so confusing because he wasn't in the beginning forcing me to do anything, but he would make a move, he would touch me, he would ask me to do something. And if I showed any resistance, he would say to me, why are you acting like this? I thought you cared about me. If you loved me, you'd want to do these things. Do you not find me attractive? Or isn't this what we talked about, being together today? And I really began to wonder if I was the crazy one, right? Am I just not understanding it? Maybe he's more experienced than me. I'm just learning. I just don't know. Maybe I am being a baby. Maybe this is just what couples do. And so it was confusing. And those first few dates that followed, it was a lot of him doing what we would call coercing me, where he would just nag and ask and try to the point where eventually I would just kind of give in and give up and do as he pleased, or do just enough that he wanted me to do. And all of this was a lot to manage emotionally and handle. We'd have these dates, I'd be excited, and then I would feel absolutely horrible once I was with him and after the date, and I never knew how to process it or what to make of it. And then as these dates went on, slowly but surely, he became much more extreme and uncomfortable. So I would often try to say the words no. I would outright tell him, I don't want to do this. No, or you can't do that, or don't touch me like that. And it did not matter. I have the most vivid memory of one day where he came over to my parents' house when they weren't home, and he forced me to perform oral sex on him. And I literally had tears in my eyes. I was crying, and he was just forcing my head onto him. And this just quickly became normal to me and to our relationship overnight. We didn't really talk anymore. We didn't have conversations. We didn't hang out. We didn't share any interests. We didn't do anything outside of now these like secret dates where he was extremely abusive. And not only that, sometimes the things that he would suggest or ask or bring up, they were things that were so advanced sexually, especially for me to even grasp and understand back then. Even now I look back and think, what 14, 15-year-old knows these things or tries to do these things? And it was painful dealing with this on a regular basis. And not only that, he was also abusive in other ways. He was verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive. He was constantly making jokes about my looks, about my body. You know, he would do things that were demeaning, like to an additional level too. So he would sometimes tell personal stories or share private information at the lunch table right in front of all of his friends. And speaking of his friends, probably one of the most painful incidents of abuse by this boyfriend was one day he came over with two friends of his. We were all downstairs in my parents' finished basement. We were just watching a movie, hanging out. I had no concerns. I wasn't alert. I wasn't worried about anything. When all of a sudden, he came over to me, pinned me down, and legitimately pulled my pants down and molested me right in front of his two friends. I'm talking, I was horrified and I started panicking and saying, "No, what are you doing? What? Like, your friends are here. Why are you doing this?" And he was just laughing as he was doing it. And one of the two friends just watched the whole time while the other one stared ahead and watched the movie. And then after a few minutes, he walked away and laughed at me as I scrambled to pull my pants back up. So he did things to degrade me, to make me feel less than. And now that I am removed from it all, I can see that all of it was an attempt to feel in control, to feel like he had power in the relationship. That's everything from the most heinous acts to the little micro comments and the little jokes about my body image. It was always something. And this relationship, it breaks my heart because I went into it as innocent as any, early teen girl, wanting her first, crush to give her a romantic kiss and have our first relationship and have it be special. And it was anything but that. It was painful and it was traumatic. And as a result, I didn't know how to cope. And this is going to sound so messed up, but I kept diaries back then. I've always been a journaler, and I still have them to this day. I'll have to read some on a different video. If you would kind of dig seeing some of my old journal entries, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video of that. But, some of the things that I wrote in it, because I was just reading it the other day, I would make these comments like, so-and-so came over today and he didn't even force me to do A, B, and C. I feel like he actually finally cares about me. So to me, being cared for was just equated with not being abused. And it's really sad that I thought he had these changes of heart anytime he didn't do something that hurt me. And it's sad. It's sad because that's not how you expect any relationship to go, let alone your first one. And so I share all this to say I was experiencing abuse and I wasn't talking to anyone about it. And as you might imagine, being a teenager, this led to a lot of emotional and mental health issues. I had never in my life struggled with any of these issues until now. I started experiencing anxiety and depression and severe self-esteem issues. I was turning to a lot of unhealthy coping tools like drinking alcohol for the first time ever to try to get rid of the pain. I was drinking before school in the mornings. I was self-harming. I had really disordered eating habits. And of course, I couldn't focus on something like school or extracurriculars or the things in my life that used to matter to me because this whole aspect of my life, this whole big dark secret, just felt all consuming. And so from that relationship onward, my life as a teen just spiraled out of control. Not only was I struggling, I was acting out, I was rebellious, I was fighting with my parents, I was lashing out. It just became this snowball effect where just one day after another, things just felt like they were getting worse. And also, you recall that a few moments ago, I talked about how this boyfriend would often tell stories to his friends or spread information to other people. And this is where I began to experience other victimization. Yes, I was sexually assaulted more than once by more than one individual. This was the beginning of years of abuse and victimization. So very early on, for example, when he began to tell those stories to the kids at school, well, that just created this, firestorm of rumors. And suddenly now there were labels and targets on my back. The kids at school called me all of the most horrific names imaginable, and not just shouted them at me in the hallways, but wrote them on the bathroom walls about me. Now that began to spread this idea to other immature teenage boys at school. And so I began to experience harm by other individuals. I remember, as an example, my boyfriend at the time, on and off again, like I said, it wasn't a real relationship. He just would kind of pick dates and times to bother and harass me. But he had told some boys that he was friends with what my house address was and which bedroom window was mine, and he told them to go knock on it at night and said, "Oh, she'll let you in." And no joke, there was one night where around 1 a.m, there were knocks at my bedroom window. I was terrified. I was a teenager, and this was scary. I also began to get harassed online. I was cyberbullied. That boyfriend was often calling the house with his friends and prank calling the house, and not just leaving funny messages on our voicemail or when my mom answered, but saying the most inappropriate sexual things that I don't even want to repeat to myself in my own head. We'll just leave it at that. At the same time, other people now heard these rumors and thought they could also have their way with me. One of his friends actually showed up one day at my parents' house when they weren't home. I lived in a small town, and I often left the front door unlocked and open on a nice sunny day, and this friend walked right in. I was startled at first. I asked him why he was there, but he just started to try to force himself on top of me. And I was saying, "No, what are you doing?" But it didn't matter. He just kept trying. He kept trying to get me to touch him. He exposed himself to me, and he forced himself on me. And eventually, after enough give and take and fighting, he left my house. This was devastating. I was so bothered by this. I was angry, I was upset, and at the same time I thought, well, it's happened again. There's more proof. This must just somehow be my fate or what I'm supposed to experience. Shortly after that, I went to a party with my best friend, and another incident happened with another boy at school where he forced me to perform oral sex on him. I said no. I said I didn't want to. He forced me anyway, using physical force. And then after made these comments like, "Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anyone. I don't want to embarrass you." And that is such a common thing that individuals say that I look back at that and I think, what a manipulative comment, right? It just adds another layer of maintaining control, making you feel like you did something wrong, making me silenced. So that was yet another incident. Shortly after that, I was hanging out with the boyfriend again, or the on and off boyfriend at this point, with a larger group of his friends and his family members. And at one point, they decided to run an errand, get some food or something. And I was left at the house to hang out. It was just me there and one of his older cousins, who I thought was a totally cool guy. I enjoyed hanging around with him. never felt any discomfort. So there I was sitting on the couch watching a movie, waiting for everybody to come back, when out of nowhere, this cousin had stepped into the bathroom for a moment, and he came out and he was fully naked. And as I sat there, I froze up. A lot of times when people share their sexual assault stories, you hear this concept of freezing. This is a physical response a physical state that your body goes into when you feel fear. That experience happened to me in that moment. I was so frozen and unsure what to do. And I kind of just like smirked a little bit and giggled and said, "What are you doing?" And he just said a few words, trying to get me to calm down, trying to get me to relax. And the closer he got, I froze up more and more to the point where I felt like I wanted to say something and couldn't. And that day, he turned me over and sexually assaulted me. Now, what makes this story even worse is that I thought that he was a few years older. I was 15 at this point. I had just recently turned 15. He had always told me that he was 18. I later found out that he was in fact 23 years old, 15 and 23. And then there was one more incident. My senior year, I was once again in a place with people I knew and trusted. It was a party where we were experimenting with things. I was tired. My best friend was there. We knew these people, and we decided to crash at this house. And at some point early in the morning, I woke up and my pants were undone and halfway around my thighs. To this day, I don't know what happened. And if you've been following along, basically now this is 5 different individuals who have sexually assaulted me. And what made them so confusing at the time is that it wasn't what I thought sexual assault looked like. I thought that this was something that happened by a stranger. This is something that you see on TV where you're in the dark alley and someone comes out of nowhere and holds you at knife point and has their way with you. These are people I knew. And they were situations where I would get in my head and wonder if I was the problem. Maybe it was something I did. Maybe I shouldn't have had that extra Smirnoff Ice and fallen asleep at this house. You know, all of this was me blaming myself. But what I know now is that the responsibility is solely on the person who assaults, the person who commits rape and sexual assault. They are the person responsible. And this is a really important teaching point because in 90% of cases, sexual assault victims know their perpetrator. It's often someone you know or trust or are in a relationship with. And that doesn't make it okay. It's still assault. And like I said, I was already struggling with my self-esteem, with my identity, with my sense of agency or empowerment, and my life just felt like a mess. I not only was self-harming, but I had really dark thoughts. I felt worthless. I was doing all these things trying to cope that were so damaging and harmful to who I was. I was severely at risk, and I was just trying to deal with it all on my own. And it breaks my heart. You know, I so often grieve my adolescence because of these experiences, because I was forced to grow up so fast. And so that was high school. I was victimized. I was poly-victimized by just the kids at school and just the constant ongoing ripple effect of that first relationship. And it's just awful. And I want to say that that's the end of it, but it wasn't. And the rest of the story I'm going to wrap up relatively quickly. But by then, I really believed, I hoped that there would be a second chapter for me. You know, I went to a small town high school, which made it feel like these issues were even worse. Everyone heard the rumors. Everyone had a, preconceived idea about who I was. It felt like everyone knew everyone. And I really hoped, I had this optimism within me that if I could just somehow survive high school and get out of that town, that maybe I could start fresh. And that feeling kept me going. I was falling to pieces, but I was hopeful that I could start anew the second I graduated. And I do want to just say that when I look back at high school, I do think two things played a huge part in what I think saved my life. First and foremost, 90% of it was my best friend. Shout out to all the amazing best friends out there. She did not stab me in the back. She did not join the in crowd when they were spreading rumors. She was there supporting me at all times. She was crying for me. She was with me. She still to this day probably doesn't know all the details, but she was the only person I felt comfortable somewhat opening up to, and she was so supportive. And after I fully stopped talking to that first boyfriend, she was trying to get me involved in clubs at school. She got me involved in drama club. And I would say that that was the other 10% of what saved me, was having this really fun community of people, finding my voice, being on a stage. I auditioned and sang for the first time ever, thanks to my best friend nudging me. And I didn't even know I could sing until that moment. And the chorus teacher just, was praising my voice, and it felt good. It felt like I actually maybe had some value after all. And so those two things were hugely helpful. So by the time I got out of high school, I could not have run out of those doors fast enough, left that building fast enough, gotten out of that town fast enough. I picked a college that was 2 hours away, and I was hopeful, like I said. And by all means, my first year, my freshman year, was awesome. I had friends on campus. I had friends in my dorm building. We had a social life together. I was loving my classes. I was, getting really good grades. It finally felt like my life was turning back around. However, now when I look back at that freshman year, it was not without its harms either. That first semester at college, I did experience another sexual assault. I had gone out one night to a campus party. After a few drinks, kind of knew that I was done and needed to go to bed and just get back to my dorm building. And I made my way back safely. I made my way into my dorm room, and my roommate hadn't come back yet. And I just figured I'd leave the door unlocked for her. No big deal. She'd had her key to get into the building, but the door would be unlocked. And I went to bed. And that night, a few hours later, I was groggy. I had been drinking. I was out of it. I woke up, and there was a guy in my building who I was friends with who must have let himself in, because when I woke up, he was on top of me and inside of me. And I very clearly remember kind of mumbling and trying to push him off. And after a few seconds of that, I just fell back asleep. The next day, I told my dorm mate, and, she was supportive. She was asking me what I wanted to do. And my honest response to her was just to kind of roll my eyes and just say, F him, we're not friends anymore. Because by then, this was my life. What should have felt like some horrible violation, unfortunately, had become my norm. And that too is a really terrifying reality for a lot of people who become repeat victims of abuse. I moved on with the year, and that was it. I never reported and never really told anyone. And then there was one more and one final incident that year, again with someone I super trusted. This was my closest guy friend on my college campus. We hung out every day, talked every day. In the beginning, he had some feelings for me, and he brought this up from time to time, and we always had really healthy conversations around it. I would tell him, I don't see you in that way. If we can't be friends, I understand. And he was respectful, and he honored me saying no to him and to his advances. Except one night, he was drinking heavily, and he just was absolute an absolute mess. And he just was pouring his heart out to me and begging me to be with him, to the point where I kept saying, no, no, no. But he just kept grabbing at me and trying to kiss me. And he got so aggressive that eventually he overtook my attempts to decline him. And he also sexually assaulted me. So that, I believe, is 7. And what bothers me sometimes is that there may be more that I've blocked out. So it was a lot. And I defined my life by it. I defined my identity by it at times. And when it happened in college too, I really began to wonder if this was just my fate, my destiny. I think in many ways, I often told myself, this is just the hand I've been dealt, and I've just got to deal with it. I've got to accept it. I've got to manage it. Never once did I think just to report or ask for help. Now, today, I look back and I've done so much healing, and it's uncomfortable for me to tell this story, but my scars have healed. I am in control now. I am empowered now, and I am not ashamed. The shame should be on all those a-holes. Do I wish I would have reported back then? Yeah, but I just wasn't able to, and that's okay. I forgive myself for that too. Now, I mentioned up top that I also experienced domestic violence, and I'm not going to start that story now. We'll be here all night, but part 2 will be about that story. And while the two don't need to be related, for me, they were related. Because I'll give you a little teaser. All of that pain, underneath it all, I still just so desperately wanted someone to love me and to care for me and to treat me well. And at the beginning of most abusive relationships, these people paint themselves as everything you want them to be. I thought I finally hit the jackpot. I thought I was finally free. And in many ways, I was extra vulnerable to falling into an abusive relationship. And that relationship turned my life upside down. If I was a mess internally before, externally, everything became a mess too. But I'll save that for the next video. So let's once again take a deep breath. And I'm going to take a sip of water. I really want to, first and foremost, thank you for listening to my story and sharing this moment with me. It is not easy. And like I said, I don't usually tell the full story. When I speak, usually I just mention the first boyfriend and then the last college boyfriend. I will mention that I struggled in the years in between, but I don't always get to talk about how many more assaults and individuals and incidents there were in that time period. I also just want to make a disclosure that, during those, this would have been like a 4-year period, high school up until my first year of college, so 5 years. There were some great people in my life too. The end of my high school experience, I had a really amazing boyfriend, but peppered in between the good people and the good times, the harm just kept resurfacing, or I just kept finding myself being victimized. So I don't want to make it seem like everyone was bad. And for anybody who might be watching this that knew me in high school, maybe you remember some of the people in my circle or the people I dated. Some of them were really great too. So I thank them for that. So let me know if you have any questions. This feels like an out-of-body experience I just had, and I don't know what I missed, what was unclear. So drop a comment, ask me to clarify things, ask me for advice, insights, and I am more than happy to answer every single one of your comments. I want to take a quick moment now just to kind of wrap up with some takeaways, some things that we can learn, some insights, and also a few closing remarks on healing, because I want to end on a high note. So, first big takeaway: if you have ever experienced harm of any kind, similar to my story or just adjacently similar, you are clearly not alone. One of my greatest regrets was believing that I was alone, but you're not. There's people that are out there that can understand you. You are part of this community of courageous survivors that are forging our way in the world every day despite whatever happened. So know that you're not alone. Know that there are resources, and know that you too can overcome and seek help no matter who you are. And today we live in a time where resources are, not just available and so accessible right at our fingertips, and I'll make sure I link them at the end and below this video, but also there are resources for all people of all identities, which means that there is less of a barrier to seeking help. So seek resources and get the support that you need now before, instead of just trying to deal with this on your own, because it is painful trying to deal with it on your own. I think the second big teaching point and takeaway that we can take from the story is that the person you're dating can be the person who sexually assaults you. This brings up a whole conversation about consent, and I think I'll create a whole video on what consent is to have a conversation around that. But just because you're dating someone doesn't mean that they have a right to intimacy with you. It does not obligate you to do anything for them. You have autonomy over your body, and no one can demand or unreasonably expect anything from you. Consent is freely given. It is explicit. It's not a question mark. It's not a guessing game. It's not just a given because you're in a relationship with someone. It's something that you continually get from your partner. So it's asking, is this okay? Are you all right? Can I do this? Every single time. And anytime consent is not present, sexual assault is likely to occur. If you did not tell someone that they can, if you did not agree to something, if you didn't say no, if you were silent, if you froze up, if you were drinking, it does not matter. Consent is the only thing that is needed to avoid sexual assault. All right, so let's quickly talk about healing. So for me today, my healing journey has been empowering, and I'm so grateful for it. I'll kind of spoil the end of the story, but there came a day shortly after my abusive college boyfriend and I split where I read this quote that said, "The greatest revenge is massive success." I remember hearing that quote, and in an instant, all I wanted to do was thrive because of what everybody did to me. I thought of that first boyfriend and him laughing and wanting to see me struggle and feel small, and I thought, if any of you ever hear my name or see my face, it better be because I'm doing amazing things. And while shifting into that thought pattern didn't miraculously heal me, it was so instrumentally helpful to me in my healing journey to want to chase success versus staying stuck in this pattern, or in my mind, letting them win by me struggling. And so day by day, I began to put the pieces of my life back together. And I did so in little ways by, ensuring my safety and taking care of myself and reading about abuse and being introspective and journaling. And a really big thing that I did was I started to get involved with anti-violence work. I looked up a domestic violence agency. I started volunteering with them. And this kind of commitment to activism and social change was so big in my healing. And it really began the trajectory of what would become a career where I would go to school and study the justice system and work in victim services and now do what I'm doing today. And I've also really healed by telling my story. It's allowed me to reclaim it, to write it, to not feel ashamed or embarrassed, but to speak from a place of power. And I'm so grateful for that. And I want to make it really clear that the path I've chosen for healing is certainly not everyone's. But I think just day by day, working on processing it has been really important. And in the world of healing, there's a lot of different phases and steps and different parts that help a person become whole again. And where you are is totally you on your journey. If you have recently experienced something like an assault, I would highly recommend that you seek professional support, contact those resources, and consider a medical examination. Now, it's important to know that if you do report to a hospital or talk to someone, this does not mean that criminal charges are going to be filed. You can do things and make that choice on your own after the fact. In addition, if it's been a little bit of time and you're kind of on your healing journey, I think for me, learning about abuse, educating myself, reading, seeking out other survivors, things like this really allowed me to process my own experience internally, which was really, really helpful. But it can also be helpful to process your experience with the help of another person. So seeking out therapy, talking to even just a trusted friend. It's often these secrets that we harbor and keep to ourselves for a long time that slowly over time still begin to bubble out because we never fully processed and released them. So do some journaling, do some reading. Even if you just journal just for yourself, processing and integrating what you've been through can be a really helpful step. And then the other piece of healing really comes from regaining power, a sense of power over your life, reclaiming your life. Because when someone abuses you or assaults you, they, in a way, are taking a sense of your autonomy, right? It's a violation. But the way that you build empowerment and you heal and you regain strength is by doing little things that show you have power. From making daily decisions, to setting boundaries with people, to saying the word no, to not feeling like you owe everybody something or that you have to act and behave in a certain way. I encourage you to really just kind of look at your everyday life and think about, where could you be more assertive? Where could you be more decisive? Where could you influence and insert your decisions and your choices and wants and needs versus maybe letting other people make those choices for you? These are all parts of the healing journey. And I am such a nerd for the healing process, and it will be the core of my next book. But if you have questions about healing, I know I just kind of like spewed some random stuff at you. Let me know what your questions are below, and I will answer them in the comments. But like I said, for me, it's been a mix of learning, getting involved, telling my story, reclaiming the power in my life, building up my independence, and my life's been a dream. To this day, I've done so many incredible things. I launched a global storytelling platform for survivors. I've been recognized for my activism work. I have lobbied for policy change. I have testified and shared my story. I was in an award-winning documentary. All of these things that I never imagined. For such a long time, I really believed I was somehow destined to be a victim, but I now know I was destined to be a survivor, to do this work. And despite its awful origins, I'm very grateful to do this work. Okay, that's all for this video. Again, this was kind of part 1 of 2 or 3. In the next video, I will be sharing my domestic violence story. This is a whole story in and of itself of a boyfriend in college that truly turned my life upside down. And let me know too if you have any questions or requests for that video. I'm glad to customize these. Like I said, this is unscripted and raw, and we've been going for 45 minutes already. And so you can let me know how to improve or add to these videos, and I take all of that into consideration. And then after that, I'll be sure to kind of go in depth and talk about my journey into the world of activism and advocacy and even professional speaking and how this is what I do today. So if you found this video helpful, let me know. If you found solidarity in it, let me know. Share it with someone. Please give this video a like. All of this engagement helps. I speak on big stages, but I'm hoping to make YouTube an additional stage where I can show up and serve and make an impact. And in order to do that, I need some engagement. I need people to join me because I can't do this on my own, just talking to a screen and hitting publish and hoping someone sees it. It's always helpful if anyone sees it, but I know that the more people that start talking about this issue, the more chance we have at finally changing and shifting the stigma and ending abuse. So, thank you as always. I hope that you enjoyed this despite how heavy a topic it was. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I put out new videos every week. I'm Ashley Bendixson. Full information below the video.